So welcome back to another edition of the Heart to Heart podcast. And my guest today is John Vallis. So John has been on the show twice before. He's also one of my friends since I was been about 10 years old, and the host of the Bitcoin Rapid Fire podcast. So John, welcome back, brother.
Mike, it's always a pleasure. It's Friday. I'm feeling a little amped up today, so I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited too. We both decided to have a little alcohol during this podcast, so this could be my first one doing that. So cheers.
Cheers. What an honor.
You basically still drink beer, hey?
I love it, man. I love it. I don't care about the carbs, the estrogens, all that shit. Look, I could get hit by a truck tomorrow, right? I don't give a fuck. I'm drinking some beer every now and then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a beer guy, but Friday and Saturdays, I need a little bit of gin, so that's what I'm drinking. But I got actually so I don't know if people watch this. I got the Moscow Mule cup.
Like it a lot.
I always loved Moscow Mules, but the ginger beer component was always really shitty because it was always filled with sugar. And then about maybe 2 years ago or so, I discovered that Zevia actually makes ginger beer. So that's what I'm drinking, a little bit of gin with some ginger beer and a Moscow Mule cup. I don't have like the mint and everything to go on with it, so I guess it's not officially Moscow Mule, but Moscow Mule.
That was my Pim, my partner, got me onto Moscow Mules when we were living in Thailand, and I'm not a big mixed drink person, but if I'm gonna have a mixed drink, it's a Moscow Mule in those bomb ass cups. So I'm with you.
Yeah, you can't have a Moscow Mule in a Moscow Mule cup. It just doesn't work.
No. I agree.
So you just got back from Norway?
Yeah, there was. So the Oslo Freedom Forum, which is put off by the Human Rights Foundation, was in Oslo, of course. And CT, the Norwegian Bitcoin company that I work for, was a major sponsor of the event. And so we were there for, I think, 3-day event in Oslo, which was incredible, because a lot of these activists, types, people fighting for human rights and journalists and all those sorts of people, they very seldom appreciate the role that the manipulation and corruption of money plays on authoritarian regimes. Like they fail to recognize that, it permits effectively the authoritarianism to take place. And Alex Gladstein, who's the chief strategy officer for the Human Rights Foundation, he's also a Bitcoiner, and so for years he's been weaving in Bitcoin into these events. And I think this was the first where, because it was always like the Bitcoin stuff was off in like a secondary what are they called, like auditorium, in whatever the venue was, and this year it was weaved within like the main stage, and so there was a lot of great Bitcoin content. And then of course there was a lot of activists there learning about this for the first time through that particular lens, and it was really cool to see. And then about 30 of us, CT again sponsored like a special retreat for about 30 people, both a mix of Bitcoiners and activists, to go up north of the Arctic Circle in Norway for 3 days, 2 nights, to do some hiking in the area, do some like workshops, and just basically build relationships and get to know each other. And that was spectacular. I mean, first of all, like the sun goes down for an hour at like 1 a.m. and then you watch the sunrise at 2 a.m. And so it's like really weird, and we ended up just staying up late, drinking both nights. Nice. But we did a lot of great hikes in between and jumped in the water, and it's such a great group of people. And it's a really special way a really effective way to build relationships with like very impactful people. So the whole thing was great, and I love that more people are becoming aware of the role that money plays in control of people. And again, that's on a spectrum from like dictatorships and authoritarian regimes to the ones that we live under, and how Bitcoin is a potential solution to that and is an emerging solution to that. And it's wonderful because, I know I'm rambling a bit, but I met this political activist and politician from Venezuela. His name is Leopoldo Lopez. And I think he was like the mayor of an area of Caracas, and anyways, very prominent there and very popular. And the Maduro regime didn't like him. I won't, go through all the details, but basically he was put in prison for 7 years, 4 years in solitary confinement.
Holy
And then
shit.
he was finally able to escape, and he's been living in exile since. And he was there, and he also joined us on the retreat. And he'd been fighting his whole life for freedom, basically, in Venezuela, to try to get free and fair elections and try to bring democracy and all that stuff. But he never really understood the kind of the linchpin aspect, which was the money. And over the course of 3 days, I mean, he really got the fire hose from like myself and about 3 or 4 other hardcore Bitcoiners. And I think, and he's such a strong, convicted, but still humble man. And so he would, the whole time he was asking questions, really wanted to learn and know. And I feel like he's going to take that knowledge, and it's really going to amplify his work in the coming years. And so it's that kind of stuff that, because we can forget that element of it oftentimes, because there's a lot of African activists there too that are using Bitcoin for people to insulate themselves from severe inflation, or extricate themselves, flee a certain jurisdiction or country and be able to do so with their wealth intact, be able to take their wealth with them. And we can forget that aspect of this sometimes when we talk about it as an investment, or the Bitcoin future that I always talk about, or the philosophical elements, because even though there's big problems that exist in the developed world, Canada, the US, Western Europe, they're not as severe as many other parts of the world. And so we forget that, for us, Bitcoin is something we're really hopeful about, and we hope it succeeds, and we see a better future as a result of it. But for a lot of people, it's a lifeline right here and right now. And to hear the stories of how people are using it for that purpose has been very impactful to me.
So it seems like, I mean, more or less, I think we both agree that whoever controls the money essentially, has the power. And right now, the government, controls our money. They take, almost half of your money in Canada once you hit a certain tax bracket. And obviously they have all the power. But the thing is that it seems like what you just described is kind of two different groups. There's people who sort of living in, not necessarily always in North America, but living in North America, who see Bitcoin as basically just like another stock that they can just invest in and then take money out and make money on. But then there's this other group of people, particularly it sounds like more in not always, but a lot of times in third world countries, that see Bitcoin very, very differently, and they see it as a way to escape corruption and a way to freedom. That's kind of what I'm gathering for what you just mentioned just then.
Yeah, 100%. And again, necessity is the mother of invention and adoption. And so, things are happening rapidly in those parts of the world with regards to Bitcoin, especially like West Africa, Nigeria and Togo and Senegal and these sorts of places. I mean, again, we have the luxury of only having to deal with what is, perhaps real inflation of 15% a year, 20% a year, talking about monetary expansion, not necessarily CPI. And that's horrible. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge critic of even that, but in those places, I mean, it's so egregious that if you are not active in protecting your wealth, it will be siphoned away from you very rapidly. I mean, Turkey just posted, I think their year-over-year inflation in Turkey, which I think just came out today, was 74%. 74%. So you could have spent your whole life, 20, 30, 40 years of your working life saving, and more than half of its purchasing power is gone in 1 year. I mean, and that is literally your life being taken from you, because you have to sacrifice your life, your time, and your energy to accrue wealth, to accrue money. And when someone can just click a button and siphon that away from you, I mean, there's no worse of a violation of your sovereignty, really, other than physically putting you in a cage, which obviously often happens in tandem with monetary debasement and hyperinflation, because that's another method of keeping control of things when things unravel as a result of the monetary debasement. But
I think it's no longer like a hidden tax, because people understand now that, and I mean, not that it was a hidden tax before, but when inflation is, 2 or 3%. Now it's crept up in Canada to more than 6%. So people are recognizing it, they're understanding it, and they're feeling it in their wallets, right? So, but when you look at like when you said Turkey, 74%, I mean, that's not hidden. That's a major tax, right? Like that's absolutely brutal. Like you said, I mean, you're someone who's working your whole life. Maybe you think, you need 2 million to retire, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden, that 2 million is now worth more like, 1.25 million, which is crazy. So, now like, a bunch of your savings, almost half your savings is just completely eradicated. And you didn't do anything wrong for that to happen. It was just done because people in power have this insane financial system that just corrupts the people, and people don't necessarily understand how it works. But, the one, silver lining from this is that it's no longer a hidden tax. Like I think like once, it gets passed, in Canada, I think people are starting to wake up, a little bit anyway at 5 or 6%. But like the higher it goes, the less it's hidden, the more it's being discussed, and probably the more pushback we're going to get from people.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great point. Most people let's be real, most people don't even consider these issues, but to the extent that they have, a lot of people will look at 2% a year inflation. And the crazy part is most people, most learned people, stockbrokers, economists, business people will tell you that it's not only acceptable, but it's good. It's good that there's a little inflation every year. We need some inflation for the economy to grow. And it's such an asinine perspective, and it betrays a poor understanding of the function of money itself. But I do think you're right, is that, of course, when inflation becomes more noticeable, when the price of gas gets to a point where it really starts to pinch on your pocket.
It's over $2 here right now. $2 a week.
Right. And so people notice that. But the tragedy is that a lot of the people that are most affected by it, even if they're aware of what's happening and that it is a hidden or now overt tax, I mean, a lot of these people are living paycheck to paycheck anyways, if they weren't borrowing to cover the cost of life. And so a 10, 20, 30%, depending on the good, increase in the price, absent a commensurate increase in your wages or your salary, is devastating. And this is why monetary inflation ultimately becomes a social problem, a massive social problem. It leads to social degradation. And you see this everywhere where significant inflation has happened, because the wealth gap grows. People that are able to insulate themselves from inflation via the purchasing of assets and stuff like that can do so for a time. And people that are living paycheck to paycheck, with only cash balances and no material investments or assets, they get the most harmed. And more people fall below that line where they can't keep up. And of course, when people become desperate, society suffers, because, desperate people do desperate things. And then even at a certain point, even
like increased crime, right? Because people are desperate, they're definitely going to have an increased crime rate.
Absolutely. Increased crime, increased social problems, increased demand
Violence
on the
probably
state
too.
the violence, demand on the state to provide social services, which are increasingly the state can't afford it, because simultaneously tax revenues are going down. It's a vicious spiral that even ultimately the people that are privileged enough to be able to insulate themselves from these issues, they can't either, because the whole thing kind of crumbles, and so and again, this is why fiat money ultimately creates a tiny class of wealthy people at the top and a massive class of underserved poor people at the bottom. And again, that's not a recipe for a harmonious society and a balanced, healthy society and individuals and culture. And this is, history is rife with examples of this. And it's the thing is we've never been on a global fiat currency standard before. This has always happened in isolation. And now it seems to be the case that it's unraveling. Well, because all countries and economies are on a fiat currency standard, that sort of scenario is coming for all of them. And it's not a matter, so it's just a matter of where you are on the timeline and to what degree, as a result of that, you're experiencing these problems. I mean, if you look at Canada, even over the last 10 years, let's say, those problems have been worsening. Those social issues, those welfare issues, all that kind of stuff have been worsening, but they've been at a pace that is seemingly manageable. even though like if you extend the
Just
timeline
kind of
out
like they're getting taxed. It's seemingly manageable, even though, it shouldn't, it has been hurting people the whole time.
Yeah, and if anyone who's kind of paying attention can see that manifestation in society, if you go to the right places, right? If you go outside your own little bubble, and it can't be maintained. That the government doesn't have the money to maintain that in perpetuity. But to be fair, Canada's lesser down the timeline than a place like Turkey, let's say. But the punchline is that's only a difference in time, not in kind. The same problem is going to plague all these countries that are on a fiat currency standard. And what's going to happen when the chickens come home to roost, basically? And I think we're probably going to experience, and this waxes and wanes, right? Which is why it's hard for people to get. Like, we may indeed, inflation might kind of drop off over the next 6 months to a couple of years. Deflationary forces may take hold, but the punchline is that people's wealth is being surreptitiously siphoned away from them via the expansion of the money supply. And that is not something that can persist in perpetuity, because its effects are so damaging on people's lives and on society as a whole. And I think you and I are going to live through the era where that comes to an end. That system comes to an end. Of course, it's my thesis that Bitcoin is going to be the thing that replaces it. But the transition probably won't be smooth. And of course, the world is not ready to just hop onto a Bitcoin standard. And unfortunately,
You think the whole world eventually is going to be on the Bitcoin standard, is what you're predicting?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of conviction in that thesis. But what I was going to say is, like, what people need to realize is that's not going to happen from a top-down perspective, most likely. Because it's such a paradigm shift in how you manage your money, how you custody your money, who's in control of your money. And it happens slowly, and it happens one by one, each individual deciding for themselves to adopt a different monetary standard for themselves. And when enough people do that, it becomes the global dominant standard. But we're so used to, in this massive government age, where basically we wait for the government to tell us what to do. It doesn't matter if it's health, doesn't matter if it's finances, doesn't matter if it's whatever. Like, the government is the primary authority. And so people may be waiting for like the solution to come from the government. And don't get me wrong, they're going to propose one, and it's most likely going to be central bank digital currencies. And those will be sold as better than fiat currencies and better than, highly volatile Bitcoin, Bitcoin as a currency and all this kind of stuff. And it'll be sold, it'll have bells and whistles and all these reasons why you're supposed to like it and believe them this time. But it'll be plagued by the same problems, and probably worse, because there'll be a lot more privacy violations and controlling mechanisms embedded within them that allows them to, exert even more control on the lives of citizens and serve and steal wealth even more easily from the lives of citizens. So it's going to be a bumpy process. But I think on the other side is a world where people are more sovereign, and they're more able to resist anyone, whether it's the government or thieves or big business or whomever, that wishes to steal their accrued value that they've given their life and time and energy to acquire.
And just discussing Canada specifically, Pierre Poliviere seems to be pretty big on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. He's obviously trying to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. We'll see if that happens. What do you think of Pierre's, and what do you think of Pierre's strategy? And do you think that he is sort of the answer to get us out of Canada's financial crisis, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I've always hated politics, as I think you know, and so I don't hold my breath for a lot of solutions to come from the political domain. But of course, we have to recognize that it's still a massive variable in the world today. And, why not press advantage on all fronts rather than just relying on one? And to that extent, I think Pierre I mean, his whole platform is, I mean, how often have you heard a politician say, my platform is to make my country the freest country on earth? It's almost never that. It's like, create jobs or advance whatever, special interest group or some virtue signal about some underserved community. Very rarely is a politician saying, I think the greatest thing that I can do for this country is to try to make it the freest country on earth so that you are more in control of your life. And look, a lot of political speech, you have to kind of dramatize this kind of stuff, but most of the things that I hear him say, I agree with, and I applaud his candor and integrity and courage in actually saying what he believes to be true. And Bitcoin's a good example of that, because I think he understands, or I'm quite sure he understands, that fiat currency is a terrible monetary standard for an economy to use. It's highly corrupt. It's highly corruptible. It's a blight on humanity, effectively. Like, I really think he knows that. And I think he understands Bitcoin fairly well, because I know he's talking to a lot of Bitcoiners behind the scenes. But he could easily avoid that issue because it's such an easy one to attack him on. If you come out and you say you're pro Bitcoin, then, and this is what happened, right? I don't know if you watched the debates, but every single one of them, said that he was irresponsible, and how could something so volatile ever be a monetary standard? And I can't believe you said you're going to fire the head of the Bank of Canada, and they attempted to rake him over the coals for it. To what extent they were successful, I'm not sure. Not very to me, but in some people's eyes, they probably were. But the point is,
dominating the polls like really, really hard.
Yeah, sure. I think he is too, which is awesome, right?
Yeah.
I didn't expect that. I guess I kind of lost faith in the electorate in Canada, but I mean, if that's true, I'm definitely impressed.
I don't know for sure, but last time I checked, like he had like a 3.5 times point lead over whoever was second, which I think was Jean Charest. Like, it was very significant, like to a point where like almost we're like, we don't even need to do this. Like, let's just give it to him, kind of thing. It was,
well, that's the impression you get. I mean, you look at social media, and there's like, even in a place like St. John's, which is super liberal, right? There was hundreds of people out at the Holiday Inn for his like stop into town and for his event.
Amazing.
And then you look at like Charest, yeah,
oh yeah, go Pierre.
Yeah. And you look at Charest's event, and there's like 4 people in like sitting in a hotel room, whatever called ballroom or something with him. So it certainly seems like that. But hopefully these things are fair. And if that's the case, then he'll probably get the leadership, and then it'll be great to see him square off against Trudeau. But just to finish that point is that he could have easily played the political game, been like, I'm not going to touch that one because it's most people don't understand it. It's an easy one for people to attack me on, and it's a really hard one for me to explain my thinking on to people because it's such a foreign thing. But I think he brought it up and he said it because he believes it to be true, and that's what makes me respect him. Someone who, regardless of the cost, regardless of the blowback, is going to say what they believe to be true. That's what you should want out of a leader. Public official.
That's courage.
Yeah, that's integrity. That's honesty. That's courage, and that's what I want. So, I'm a fan of Pierre, and I think if he gets in, he's going to enact policies that either one, get the government out of the way so that free enterprise can flourish and people can adopt whatever they want. But 2, he's probably going to be in certain ways pro Bitcoin. And that would be interesting to see. And you know what, if he makes Canada the freest country in the world, or at least if, starts heading in that direction, I might even consider spending more time there. So
that's awesome. That's good to hear. Need you back. I'll just add one more thing to that too. I fortunately had a opportunity to meet Jordan Peterson privately last week. Him and Tammy and I had a little sit down. And during that conversation, he indicated that he had met Pierre for an hour. And I mean, I think Jordan is, incredible human with, really, really good eye for reading people. And he said that as far as he can tell, he just purely has good intentions. And so that was really, really great to hear because, Jordan, like I said, is, I think, a very, very good judge of character. And he said he spent an hour with him, and he said that he thinks that he's a really good guy and that he's doing it for all the right reasons, which is fantastic to hear as a Canadian citizen.
Totally. And I that's definitely been my diagnosis, or that's been evident to me as well. And, it seems like for so long, Canada's been doing, I'm being somewhat dramatic here, but not that dramatic when I say it seems like the policies that the government have been taking have, if you wanted to like kind of destroy a country and a culture, like if you wanted to do things to actively inhibit the ability of people to be free, make their own choices, and achieve prosperity, you might be doing what the Canadian government has been doing over the last decade, let's say. And to get someone in there who's going to put who's going to bring more freedom to the lives of people so that they can determine what's best for them, and there's not going to be so many impediments in their way of achieving the life and the prosperity that they desire for themselves and their family, that's a really great thing, so I hope it goes well for them.
Yeah, I hope it really goes well for him too. One thing I wanted to ask you about today was I think I'm saying it right. Was it Lunar? Was that the coin that went from like, it seems like you don't even want to talk about this, but was that the coin that went from $120 to $0 in like minutes or seconds or whatever it was?
Yeah, something like, I mean, my feelings on shit coins,
Yeah.
but, and everything but Bitcoin is a shit coin. But yeah, it was, it all happened because they were trying to do a stable coin, which is basically a crypto that maintains a one-to-one value with the US dollar.
Okay.
And it, stable coins appear to have a role in the space at this point in its adoption curve because, well, for several reasons, but like, the biggest stable coin is Tether. And I think it has a market cap of $75 billion. And, people that are unbanked, especially in the developing world, use it as like a synthetic US dollar exposure. So they hold their meager savings in that rather than something that's volatile at the moment, like Bitcoin, let's say, because if they're relying on it for paying their weekly food bill or their monthly rent, then they can't tolerate a large degree of volatility. And so being able to access a US dollar equivalent without a bank account seems to be valuable in certain parts of the world. And so there's a number of different stable coins available, and Terra, which is the company behind Luna, I believe, they tried to do one which was like, instead of just having a bank somewhere buying the US dollars and then issuing this, the stable coin crypto, they tried to use an algorithm that would maintain the peg, basically. And that's pretty much the extent of my knowledge of what they were trying to do. But anyways, someone could see the flaws in that, and it seems that there was an attack on it. Someone realized, well, there's a way to basically mess with the algorithm in the market and attack it so that the peg can't be maintained. And then, the peg would go from $1 to $1, from $1 to 90 cents to 80 cents to 70 cents. And then the whole thing unwound and fell apart. And, the Luna token, I think it was called, went down with it. But look, I mean, my answer to all this is play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Love
like,
it.
It's just,
I just do Bitcoin. That's it. I just do Bitcoin. I don't do any other coins. That's it.
Look, if you're here, if you want to gamble, casinos are much more fun. You get free booze. You can, there's people around, there's music, like it's a good time. That's my recommendation, because that's what shitcoins are. It's taking a runner on something that you think you can time well to get in and get out and make some money on and get back into fiat. What Bitcoin is a bet on the future financial order of the world. It's staking your territory on a limited number, or staking your territory in a limited system that you're going to be able to leverage for greater purchasing power and greater optionality in the future. And there will only be one winner in this race. And it seems quite evident and obvious, at least to me and many others, that it's going to be Bitcoin. And all this other stuff will be here for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then it'll be recycled and something else will be here. And it's all just basically leveraging, because it takes time for a new monetary base layer to emerge in the world. I mean, it's actually never happened simultaneously. Gold monetized in many areas of the world, between 5 and 3,000 years ago, but it happened in different pockets and it didn't happen simultaneously. And those areas weren't communicating with each other. The reason why it happened is because the monetary attributes of gold were so sound and became so obvious in the market that all demand for monetary instruments, when gold was available, converged on gold and not anything else. And then, of course, silver emerged because it allowed for smaller denominations, right? But in the case of Bitcoin, because of its divisibility, you don't need a silver to its gold. It can be both. And this is this is part of the innovation, that you now have an absolutely scarce monetary instrument with basically pristine monetary qualities and attributes. And what's happening now is just the initial distribution and adoption going on throughout the world. It's been 13 years. And as this adoption takes place, one, it's going to be very volatile because the world is still figuring out what this is, figuring out its relevance, figuring out its implications. And a lot of opportunists come on the scene and say, oh, something that Bitcoin's most likely going to be able to do in the future, but is not doing now because that's not the correct order or sequence of events for this thing to develop into what its potential is. I'm going to say that we're doing it now. Whatever. I'm going to do smart contracts. I'm going to do stable coins. I'm going to do whatever now because Bitcoin isn't there yet. And this is our opportunity to sell that narrative. What everyone fails to realize is that it doesn't matter if you put all the bells and whistles on something. If the fundamental layer on which it sits is sand and not stone or steel, it will be swept away someday. And that's the case with all these shitcoins. And with Bitcoin, it is the fundamental base layer, and it recognizes that security and censorship resistance is the foundation. And that has to be preserved and upheld. Like, that's the most important thing. And then as time goes on, as the market matures, as the technology develops, as adoption continues, additional functionality will be brought to Bitcoin when the market dictates it should. But, this is the evolutionary process of technology. We saw something similar in the tech boom, but the difference being is that, a lot of .com companies popped up promising the world, and they were, just smoke and mirrors basically, and they went away. But it's not like Bitcoin is Google. Bitcoin is the internet. And, a lot of, I guess the more apt comparison would be during the early internet, a lot of companies thought like the intranets, like individual internets, was the way to go. Like there was some benefit to that. But then they realized that having a global, like integrated data transfer system that was open to all was far more competitive ultimately. And so just using the internet and tapping into the internet and building companies on the internet was far more effective than building all these disparate, controlled, closed garden intranets. And so I think the same is going to happen with Bitcoin. And the sooner people realize that, the better off they're going to be. The better off, the more purchasing power and wealth and options they're going to have in the future. But unfortunately, some of these lessons have to be learned the hard way. And, there's a lot of people that lack integrity out there that are trying to pitch people and sell people on things that are basically just ways to enrich themselves. And they don't have the integrity to avoid that kind of behavior.
Those other coins are like, I totally agree with the term shit coin. And I totally agree that it's just, a gambling thing that you're doing. And if you're going to gamble, go have fun somewhere at a casino where they give you free drinks, and they probably have a pretty attractive car dealer for you. Like, get rid of just get rid of that and just get into like Bitcoin if you're going to get into cryptocurrency. That just seems to be like the most logical thing to do, because if you're doing anything otherwise, you're doing something that's highly risky that could really come back to bite you. Totally. But one thing I wanted to ask about, so we know Pierre Poliviere from Canada, obviously I'm from Canada, you're originally from Canada, has been into Bitcoin, but I know that you're pretty familiar with some of the other countries that have kind of been supportive of Bitcoin. So El Salvador is one of them, but are there any others that you're aware of where some of the other countries are planning to get into Bitcoin really soon, or is that kind of something that's been slowed down recently?
It's a great question. I think what I was going to say there is like Bitcoin isn't, for a lot of people, it's not sexy enough. It's like, oh, I want something, I'm going to make more mad gains or whatever. And they fail to realize that Bitcoin is the off ramp, so for a lot of us, it's not like we're hoping that Bitcoin goes to 500,000 so we can sell it for Canadian or US dollars again. The whole goal is to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible and never sell it. And as you know, so that's one aspect. As we go through the ups and downs of this adoption curve, as it dips down, right, as the price, you know, takes a digger for a while, then some of the hype comes off it and some of the conversations stop and some people become more reticent about, oh, should we really adopt this currency? And I got to hand it to Bukele, the president of El Salvador, because he is convicted as a motherfucker and has been for a while. And I think he gets that this is a long-term thesis, that nothing of this magnitude ever emerges, you know, on a nice straight line, bottom left to top right, no volatility, no, you know, uncertainty in between, that this is a momentous shift happening in the global economic and financial and monetary order. And he's had the cojones to go all in, basically. And I credit him for that. In terms of the Central African Republic, see, the thing is that's interesting about this. So the Central African Republic, which is a country I didn't even know existed before this announcement came out, they announced Bitcoin as legal tender as well.
Are they the second country?
I believe so. There's been some, like at the Bitcoin conference in April, Madeira, which is like a Portuguese protectorate off the coast of Africa, said they were going to be adopting Bitcoin. You know, there was some rumors that Mexico, there was a bill put forward by a senator in Mexico to do the same. You know, there's been multiple bills put forward in many countries that are trying to do the same. But I think what the reality is that the countries most likely to do it are the ones that, one, don't benefit tremendously from their own currency, right? Because like if you have a legit, quote unquote, legit fiat currency that you use to run your country, it's very unlikely the government's going to want to give that up, because they know that that's a primary source of income for themselves. And like, why would they want to relinquish that? But in countries, smaller countries that are using, like a lot of countries are dollarized, for example, use the US dollar. And that was the case for El Salvador. So they didn't get any benefit from being able to print their own money. And in fact, they were on the losing end of all this monetary expansion in the US, because even though, you know, let's say 40% of the US money supply was printed in the last 2 years, at least people in that economy within the US jurisdiction, they got, you know, stimulus checks and they got PPP loans, and they got some sort of benefit from all the expansion of the money supply. But if you're a dollarized economy, you don't get any of that fiscal policy benefit. You just get the inflation. And so it's pretty devastating. And so for those smaller countries, I think they'll be the first to adopt Bitcoin, because they're not giving up a great benefit, and they stand to gain tremendously by being able to preserve their purchasing power, not have it stalled by inflation, and not having anyone be in control of their currency, which is, you know, the optimum scenario. So these smaller countries that, you know, to be frank, nobody really gives a fuck about, that are dollarized, we'll probably see that happen. Those will be the early nation state adopters of Bitcoin. But the second point is, I think it's going to be interesting to see how people go, or how countries go about this, because there has been some criticism of Bukele for two reasons. One, it's like, why make it legal tender? You know, because in his law, they quote unquote forced, although, you know, there hasn't been any enforcement, but part of the law was that you have to accept Bitcoin if someone wants to pay with it. And so that meant that, like, you know, McDonald's and Pizza Hut and all the major multinationals in the country had to figure out how to accept Bitcoin. And I think that's going to bode well for their acceptance of it in other markets, because they'll already know how to do it. All the relationships will be set up already. And that's super cool.
That seems like a very big deal. Like,
yeah, it is.
They've like,
but here's the thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. But here's the thing, like from a hardcore Bitcoiner libertarian point of view, it's like, do you want the government dictating to you what money you have to use, even if it's the money you like? And the answer for a lot of Bitcoiners is no. This should be a market. Like, the market should choose this. So I think a lot of us think that even though it would probably accelerate things if, like, you know, every country in the world just said all merchants have to accept Bitcoin, I don't think that's the way we want to get to the end that we're hoping to get to.
Yeah.
I think the means kind of corrupt the end in that sort of case. And so I think
The
it's
underlying
probably better.
theme of like freedom then is not really expressed because you're sort of forcing people just to use Bitcoin as currency as to opposed to the currency that they desire to use.
Exactly. So I think what it would be preferable, and what is happening, Panama is an example of this recently, is just deregulating. So remove capital gains taxes on Bitcoin, basically remove any regulations around it being a financial asset. Treat it as money. You don't have to force anyone to accept it, but don't put it at a disadvantage to whatever currencies are being used or in circulation. And this is what Panama recently did. So no capital gains, if you want to use it as money, use it as money. You know, no one's forced to accept it. So you'd have to negotiate with merchants and landlords and all the rest of it to have them accept it. But the free market is now it's on an equal footing with other currencies, and the free market can decide which one is best over the course of time. And the reality is that probably means adoption happens more slowly because the element of coercion is removed from the equation, and coercion is a strong force. But I think it means when we get to that place where more and more people are adopting it and making those choices, it'll be a lot stickier. It'll be a lot stronger because it won't be by government decree. It'll be because every individual, to the point I was making earlier, is making a choice. It's in their economic best interest. And as a result, they're going to be more, interested in it. They're going to be more committed to it. They're going to be more, learned about it. Like, it's going to foster a much healthier relationship to this emerging monetary instrument, I think. And so I don't have a full list of countries that have done that, but I think there are a few that have just said, we're going to treat it like that. We're not going to treat it like an asset where you have to pay capital gains or whatever. We're going to treat it as money, and we'll let the market decide. And I think that's probably the best way to go about it.
When do you see, so, you kind of talked about, some more third world countries, or, countries that are, not economic, powerhouses, so to speak, have kind of been, adopting Bitcoin. When do you see maybe the first, G8 country kind of adopt Bitcoin? Like, do you think that's going to happen in the foreseeable future? And if so, like, which country do you think is going to be first to do it?
I mean, there's a lot of wild cards that could happen, but my inclination is to say not anytime soon, because they all benefit tremendously from having their own currency. But like, case in point, if Pierre gets in 2 years' time and he just says, no taxes on Bitcoin, Bitcoin is money, use it how you see fit, equivalent to the Canadian dollar, then that would be spectacular. And that would be a major deal because, again, if Bitcoin's able to compete with fiat currencies on equal footing, you could pay your taxes in Bitcoin, all that kind of stuff. That would be very interesting. I don't know. I don't think we're going to see anyone, a G8 be like, we're adopting it as co-legal tender with our fiat currency. I don't think any of them have the balls basically to do that. I think it's going to be very much the case that the smaller places with less to lose are going to adopt it first, and in many regards they're going to leapfrog, both in terms of education and innovation of those bigger currently economies. And this is kind of always how it works, right? Like, you get the ones that are developed, they become complacent, they don't want to innovate as much, they don't want to disrupt themselves. But the places that, they don't have that established, a kind of decent example is like desktop computers and smartphones, right? Like, developed world had desktop computers, and, places, the developing world, like, Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, they just totally leapfrogged that and went right to mobile phones. And so they're digital mobile native populations now, and they've innovated tremendously there, and they've run their lives off of that, possibly, seemingly even more so than developed world. And I think something similar will happen with Bitcoin, where the developing world and the people with less like inertia around the existing infrastructure will be able to adopt it more quickly, and they'll reap the benefits of doing that. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm not holding my breath for a G8 legal tender announcement anytime soon.
Okay, got it. So right now, probably going to see more of like third world countries adopt, and then we'll see most likely you're predicting, positive outcomes from that. And then maybe from there, then we'll kind of see some of the bigger economic powerhouses, so to speak, maybe adopt Bitcoin later on, but it's not going to happen in the foreseeable future. But like you said, like you never know with someone like, a wild card like Pierre Poliviere. I mean, if he gets in a couple of years, things can change pretty rapidly. So, a lot of it really depends upon, I guess, who's in power in which particular nation at that particular time. Because if you do get, again, like I follow a little bit of politics, but I don't follow, that much. And I've really only followed, politics, diligently for the past year or two, just because, it's really been affecting my life just like everyone else. So, I've become much, much more involved. But it will be interesting to see if, there are other politicians like Pierre Poliviere and these other, economic powerhouses that have the similar views, because if there are, then, we think things can change very, very quickly. And, I hope that's something that will happen.
I think I think it'll be a priority for him if he gets in to deregulate this space and just let the free market do its thing. And that's all anyone is asking for, or all most people are asking for. And even in the US, which no country benefits more from their currency than the US,
Just explain that if you can, though. Like why does the U.S. benefit more than any other country for their currency?
well, long story short, after the war, there was a meeting called Bretton Woods where all the countries were like, all right, what's the monetary standard going to be? And the US was like, well, we already have all your gold because you sent it to us for safekeeping during the war. So how about this? We'll keep the gold and we'll promise to keep a peg basically between the number of dollars and the amount of gold. And you can treat our dollars as though they were gold. They'll be as good as gold. That cool with everybody? That cool with everybody? Oh, it's not cool with you? Well, we're the one with the nukes and we just dropped two of them on Japan. We just won the Second World War. So maybe you should reconsider your position and it should be cool with you because we're the boss now. And so that's basically what happened after the war. And the US dollar became the global reserve currency. And then in 1971, because of course they printed more dollars than they had gold, Nixon said, yeah, so we're not going to be able to like give you back your gold or give you the same number of dollars for gold anymore. So we're just not going to do that. I hope everyone's okay with that. And that was it. And so the world was on a global fiat currency standard from that point, where there was no longer any tether, any commitment to peg the amount of dollars to the amount of gold. And things have been going very poorly since then. I mean, there's so many interesting. I direct your audience to WTFhappened in1971.com. It's a great website that just shows you so many metrics, and not just financial and economic, but social metrics that had an inflection point in 1971 that began to change. Because of course, when you untether the money from any real economic work, any real energetic and time sacrifice, you're going to get bad outcomes. And this has been the case. And hopefully we're reaching, the apex of the fiat currency era, because, once you begin to understand how detrimental it's been, I mean, it's been extremely detrimental to, let's say, human flourishing, broadly speaking. And hopefully it's soon coming to an end, via the unstoppable force that is Bitcoin, let's say.
And would you say that's why so many people are in debt, is because that happened? Or what would be one of the bigger contributors?
Well, almost certainly, because it makes money creation. There's no real limit to money creation. And so, of course, people can become more in debt when there's no limit to money creation. And this also this was the era that the backing effectively of the US dollar is the petrodollar system, which is basically military might. And so to prop up the value of the US dollar after this, the US went to the major oil producers, Saudi Arabia, Middle East, et cetera, and said, look, you need to sell your oil in dollars because we need to maintain demand for dollars around the globe. And if you do that, we'll support you militarily, we'll fight for you, we'll sell you arms, all that kind of stuff. And this is what's become known as the petrodollar system. And of course, it's a, you know, it's a very poor morally constituted system, right? There's a very severe moral hazard here. But nevertheless, that's what happened after 1971. And the reason why the US benefits, to your question, is because if you are the most in demand currency in the world, that means you can get the most for it, right? So for example, Turkey, I think they're on the lira, but
They're on the lira,
Turkey can print a bunch of their currency, but most of the world's going to be like, not interested, not going to give you our goods and services for that shit. It's just inflated 75% over 1 year. What are you talking about? But no country, no merchant in the world wants any currency more than the US dollar. Now, there's a bunch of other reasons why they need it, because most of the debt in the world, that sovereign debt in the world, is denominated in US dollars. And so they need to pay interest payments in US dollars. They need to pay back debt in US dollars. So there's lots of reasons for demand for US dollars at this point. And indeed, that massive debt burden that the world is under is maintaining demand for US dollars. But the punchline is if you can produce the thing that everybody wants, that means you can get the things they have for free. And that's been the case for the US. China can produce 99% of the shit that's on Walmart shelves, and all you got to do is press a button and give them paper in return. It's a pretty handy deal. And so there's a massive benefit. And Charles de Gaulle, the president of France around the time of the Bretton Woods treaty, I believe, he referred to this as the exorbitant privilege. And of course, right? I mean, if you're the one that controls the money of the world, and it's not a money that you have to work and devote economic resources to, like, for example, gold, but if you can just press a button and make more of it and get, the world's resources in return, well, that's very handy. And that's been the case for the US for up till now. And so they're not going to relinquish it voluntarily or easily, but there are factions within the US, or senators or Congress people, that are putting forward bills that are attempting to be advantageous, or at least, again, put Bitcoin on an equal ground. Senator Cynthia Lummis out of Wyoming has been leading the charge primarily, but there are others, jumping on board. And simultaneously, there are bills being put forward to try to restrict the growth of Bitcoin and quote unquote crypto more broadly, and put more regulations and limit them and restrictions and all that kind of stuff. So this is the game that will be played while the world figures out what's going on here. But the punchline is once you realize that Bitcoin can't actually be stopped, and all you're going to do is exclude yourself or your jurisdiction or your country from the benefit to be derived from adopting it, well, then your decisions are extremely consequential. And I think more and more politicians are waking up to that, and they're being confronted with this decision. And it's, do I adopt the thing that delivers more freedom to my people, more potential, prosperity, freer markets, all that kind of stuff, and lose power in, my position in my office and relinquish that? And also, of course, it changes the global order, right? Because as we were saying, the US dollar is so powerful in a global scale that the US's geopolitical maneuvering will be diminished as well if the world is on a Bitcoin standard, because they can't just press a button and siphon the wealth off the entire world to build planes and establish military bases and invade countries and that kind of stuff. That won't be as nearly as easy anymore. And so, but this is what's happening. Policymakers are being confronted with this dynamic in this situation, and they're showing their colors. And this is Bitcoin has a propensity to reveal character, both as an individual and, as policymakers and countries. And in people like Poilievre and in people like Senator Lummis, it's revealing that they believe that individual freedom and autonomy and decision-making is more important than the government being able to steal and control and get up to whatever shenanigans they might get up to. Others are revealing the opposite. And that's great, because then we as people who still have some influence and control in these things, hopefully through, the mechanism of voting, can see that, and we can act accordingly. We can vote accordingly. And so it's great that Bitcoin is revealing this stuff.
It's in a very interesting stage right now, I believe, especially politically, because it's, if you had discussed, Bitcoin, 4 and 5 years ago, I mean, unless you were a very, very hardcore Bitcoiner, most people would have kind of laughed at you, and I don't think you would have had a chance to, win your election. But now it's sort of in a stage where, like, the people who are saying it now, in 10 or 20 years, will probably look back and say, like, holy shit, like, these guys were the pioneers. These guys are the ones who, saw the future. But at the same time, too, I don't know if there's quite enough people right now who understand Bitcoin and who understand how much money works for a politician to come out and say that they support Bitcoin. So it's in a very, very peculiar stage right now. But I think we are in the stage where it is tipping. So I do think that Pierre is making obviously I think he's making the right decision, morally, ethically, and just economically by, discussing Bitcoin. But I just mean politically by, winning people over, winning votes. I think that we're right in the stage right now where people are understanding it a little bit more, particularly with the high inflation rates. People want to know now how money works. They want to know why this is happening, and they may see this as a solution. And so, I really think that we are, it sounds like it from our conversation and from everything I've read, that we are in that tipping point right now. We're going to see more and more and more people, invest in Bitcoin. I don't think we've hit the 10,000th monkey, like, right now, but we're right there. Like, I think that it's going to be very, very soon. And I think that, Pierre's done a good job by, popularizing it in Canada a little bit. And, I only see that, becoming a bigger message for him and for other Canadians in the future.
Just think about how insane it is that someone who's running for the leadership, ostensibly, of the country is able to say out loud that they think that the head of the Bank of Canada should be fired. And, like, a lot of people in Canada will be like, oh my gosh, what? Like, what? But how, what's going to happen if we fire the head of the Bank of Canada? He's such a respectable person. Don't we need them? But the fact that enough people don't think that way, that actually think that that's like a palatable idea, that he can actually say that and not be, like, immediately dismissed. I mean, it's, again, like I said earlier, I'm impressed by, I underestimated, I guess, how far people had come in their recognition of some of the problems and in some of the potential solutions. And I think the case with Pierre, as is often the case when you're learning about something new, it's not so much that every argument that they make, you can follow the logic or you're educated enough to see the merit in what they're saying, but you can sense that how they're saying it. You can sense that they're being honest. You can sense that they're acting with integrity. And that is almost more compelling than the logic of any given argument. It's not that you should exclude the logic. Of course, you should pursue it to the extent that you can and try to understand, where whomever is coming from. But oftentimes the way people say things, like, if you sense that sincerity, then you're open to what they're saying, regardless of how much it challenges your preconceived notions. And I think that's largely what's happening with Pierre. I mean, most people don't know how the Bank of Canada works, how money creation works, how debt works, how the banking system works. Most people don't have any idea about that. But they see a man who's seemingly acting with integrity and sincerity and speaking honestly and speaking to them as though they could understand it. I mean, so often politicians speak to people like they're fucking idiots, like they can't handle the truth, right? Like, well, maybe they can. Maybe you just speak to people, like, forthrightly,
like
and maybe people will surprise you in what they're able to do. And then what do you know? Maybe you won't treat them like sheep. Maybe you won't treat them like they're someone who you need to be a shepherd over to control and do what's best for them because they can't figure it out for themselves. Maybe they can, and exactly. But yeah, and the trucker thing earlier this year was, like, incredibly inspiring.
It was a success. I mean, as soon as
Yeah.
the truckers went there, mandates and stuff started being lifted. It was definitely a success.
But it also just showed, it showed that like so many more people than most people thought could see the bullshit that was going on, and that we're fed up with it, and we're fed up with about being treated like they weren't in control of their lives and they couldn't make decisions for themselves, and they needed every single aspect of their lives and every decision they made to be made by somebody else for them. And just knowing that there was so many others that felt that way, I think was tremendously revealing about how people in Canada and largely in the world were thinking about this stuff. And to your final point about Bitcoin and like that tipping point, maybe there is no tipping point, right? Like I think of Bitcoin as a personal transformation and a personal revolution, and every single person has to make it for themselves. And then one day we wake up and people have made it. And the corollary to that one, I've been using a lot of metaphors and analogies today, but is the internet, right? There's this great clip in 1995, I think it was, of Katie Couric and Matt Lauer and another early morning show person. And at the end of the show, they put the email address of the show up, right? And it was early days internet, and they had to read it out. And they were like, if you want to get in touch with us, send us an email. And then they were like, oh, it's today's show. What's that little round A thing? What do you call that? What is that?
That's
and they were like, so they had, the internet was so foreign and it wasn't obvious. But today we're like, yeah, obviously, like everyone's adopted the internet. We run our whole lives on that thing. And I think the same will be true. Like people have to go through their own process of understanding what this is, why it's valuable, why it's important, how to engage it. And over time, you get more comfortable. It's not like you just decide one day, yeah, sure, I get Bitcoin and I adopt it, I'm done. No, I mean, even me, every single week, every single month, every single year, I understand it more, I engage it differently, I use it more effectively in my life. And that's the process of slowly but surely moving on to a system that's more free, more fair, more open, and provides the opportunity for us all to have a more prosperous and peaceful life and future. And I think that's what most of us want.
I think, yeah, I think that's definitely what people want, and I think that Bitcoin is definitely something that can provide that for us in the future. And sorry to do this to your brother, but the hour is up. It's been an amazing hour, my first gin infused podcast, so that was great to experience. Maybe we'll have to do a couple next time to make it really interesting. But before we leave, where can people find you online, and where can they listen to the Bitcoin Rapid Fire podcast?
If you just Google my name, I'm sure all the relevant destinations will pop up. So that's probably the easiest way to go.
All right, just Google John Vallis, and you'll see his podcast. You'll see his pages. He's pretty big on Twitter. I think he's got over 50,000 followers there. So that's probably where you're most active. But thanks so much for coming in, online and sharing all the information. Thanks to everybody for listening. And as always, I'll be back again with another podcast soon.